Well, good evening, one and all. Happy Friday evening. I hope you all had a fantastic week. Let me adjust a light here. And I want you to look on the back wall to make sure I'm not going to cast any fake anomalies on the wall. So I don't know if you know what that's all about, but um, there was one of our listeners, and I can't remember your name off the top of my head. I got to go look and see who called this to my attention. But we had a very interesting light anomaly that fell right. You see where my finger's pointing? Right back in here from a few nights ago. And it was very interesting. And so I looked at it and I tried to repeat what we saw up there, a fading light that came down. And in kind of a wispy-looking little shape, an amorphous shape that changed shape as it came down. And I was unable to reproduce that, which is what we do when we see light anomalies or hear EVPs or things like that run into strange things. We try to reproduce them for the purpose of debunking them. And so it was very interesting that I was not able to debunk that little light source. So it's very interesting. And it was also when we saw that little anomaly, it came right on the heels of something I was saying in the reading that said something like, I was being sarcastic, and I said something to the effect of, "You're all asking where the aliens are? Well, hang on," I said, "they're coming." And as I'm saying that, there's a little light anomaly right there at the tip of my fingertip, only it was back here somewhere, coming right down in between the hat back there and the flag. And so it was kind of fun. It was kind of exciting going through and saying, that's kind of interesting. And so I posted that up on my Facebook. You can take a look and see what you think if you're over on my Facebook page, because it was pretty interesting, I thought. And you tell me what you think when you see that. And if you want to know where it is, you can go to the video that was 2 or 3 nights ago, because I skipped a night in there because of Jeff Dougherty's show. And there was, it was the video entitled Reptilians. It was chapter 4, that one. And if you go take a look at that, go to the timestamp 52:42 and watch for about 10 seconds. And you'll see that little light anomaly up there. And you can tell me what you think. Even if you want to go do it while we're introducing things here and getting the night rolling, you can go take a look at that and see what you think of that. Let's see. Audrey had asked me, by the way, in a private message, if I had rotated the photo and some of the different things I've done. I had not rotated the photo to see what it looked like, but I thought it was very interesting that was there. So Michelle said she watched it a few times on Facebook, and I missed Jeff's talk with Anne-Marie tonight. I had a very busy day, and I actually set my alarm because I was afraid. I sat down and I fell asleep. My alarm went off, about 15 minutes ago, about 10 minutes of 10, to make sure I didn't sleep through it and wake up at like 2:30 in the morning. So I missed that tonight, and I would love to have seen that and love to have been there. But a lot of busy stuff going on today, and just could not make it over tonight. So I'm going to have to watch the rerun, but of course it's nothing like being there live. So what did you see on Rapscallions? Chris, wasn't sure what you saw over there, what you're referring to. Let's see. So everybody, I want to welcome you, by the way. Thanks for being here to join me for the next reading of the Rise and Fall. I'm sorry, I keep saying that. The Secret History of the Reptilians, the Rise and Fall of the Nephilim is what we did last month. And I love doing these readings out of the books. And I will say this, that my number of books that I've had published is finite. So there's going to be a day where the book readings run out. But I hope you know by now with Jeff and with Rocky And with all the stuff I've done in the past, I'm going to still keep doing some live videos here and doing some commentary on things and bringing new material to the table. So keep your eyes peeled tonight. Watch that area back there or any other area. I want to stick on that for just a couple of more seconds, that whole issue of there being a light anomaly that took place. Now, as you know, I have done in my past for about 20 years now, paranormal investigation work. And we have, over the years, gotten to be the place where I can confidently say, I'm no rube coming to the table. I have been there before. I have spent more time trying to find ways that things reflect things or make noises or bump or do things for unexplained phenomena, for in the attempt to try to debunk them, to make sure it's not something that happened that could be reproduced or things like that. And so I did the same thing with that light anomaly that showed up the other night. And there were a couple of things that I noticed about it right off the bat that told me I'm not going to have to dig too deep, because this isn't just reflecting light. It's the way it looked. It was the shape it had. It was the fact that the shape was amorphous and moved. It moved and shifted. It faded. It was a very steady fade, and then it faded out as it was dropping. It wasn't a round piece of dust caught in the light, which when you see a big orb like over here, it's probably way up here. There's some kind of piece of dust that's caught in the light right in the lens of the camera. Wasn't that. I looked to see, is it my rings, or was it the bracelet I had on? Was it anything that was moving in here? And I have 3 stationary lights, 1, 2, 3, that I use to give this whole feel in this corner here kind of a theatrical look. There's a bright blue light over here, a whiter blue light over here, and a bright white light there. And that casts the shadows. You see the reflection on the swords. See how I move my head, and you can see the reflection on the sword. It wasn't anything like that, and it was nothing being reflected on that back wall. You can see here, you can see shadows will even move up in that spot up there. You'll be able to see things as I move around because the light gets blocked and things like that. So you look for all of that when you're trying to figure out what it was that was seen there. And then you also take into consideration what you might call coincidence. That being the moment it happened, the timing of it, aligning to either something you're saying or questions you're asking or things like that. So if there's any reflection that you see in the back, it's either direct reflection like you see on the swords back here, or if you see these little kind of whitish shadows up here that are going on behind the swords, it's because you got 2 different colored lights casting shadows up there. But nothing is moving to create a white anomaly that's coming down. So there you go. It had, Audrey said, yes, it had sharp edges, it had angles. It also looks like a wisp of smoke that twists a little bit, but it comes down and it fades out. So Shannon, how you doing? Good to see you. Chris, good to see you. I haven't said really hello to anybody tonight. Shane, nice to see you. Michelle, glad to have you back. Audrey, of course, our Girl Friday, you could say, for all our broadcasts, it seems. And I'm just looking to see if there's anybody lucky. Nice to have you here. And Sue's, glad to see you. And Patriots Corner, that'd be Lewis. Good to have you, brother. Janice, nice to see you back. And I think I've seen everybody that's in there now, and I wanted to say hi. If I missed you, hopefully there will be a day. There will be so many of you that I won't be able to do that. But it's so nice here as I'm doing these readings to recognize your regular names and faces on these readings. So watch the backgrounds tonight. If you see anything, let me know. I think those kinds of things are quite rare, that they stick out like that and that they're seen. And I have to go back and look at the video and see who it was who pointed that out to my attention. Just forgotten in the ether in my brain. Let's see. Oh, I thought that's me. That was Audrey. Thanks, Audrey. And Everybody, thank you for being here. We're going to proceed with this reading pretty quick. It'll be a little longer one tonight. It's 20 pages, and we're going to dig into a little bit of background on trying to see where this reptilian myth comes from, if there's anything to it, by digging into the Merovingians a little bit, which should be interesting. And now, I don't think anybody has any questions. I don't think anything's going on that we need to address. And so let's move on. Let's see. We're in part 3, the alien or the serpent in alien subculture, and we're on chapter 6. And let me get there. The Merovingian connection. Now, here we go. Oh, and by the way, before I proceed, I want to tell you, with that light anomaly, I'm not saying it's anything. I'm saying what it isn't. It wasn't reflected or refracted light in here. It was nothing like that. So I'm not saying it's aliens. I'm not saying it's ghosts. I'm not saying anything like that. But I am going to tell you, based on my experience, it also wasn't reflected light. So it was strange. Let's leave it at that now and move on. The Merovingian connection. Here we go, folks. If you believe there's a lot of mythology and mystery surrounding the serpent and Elohim, be prepared to pull up your iron shorts and pull on your thinking caps, because the Merovingian connection to the serpent and the Elohim will quite possibly blow your mind. If you've heard the term Merovingian used, you may have heard them referred to in connection to the Holy Grail and the search for that sacred cup in the Arthurian legends, and still have absolutely no idea who or what they are, and that they have been tied to the mythology of the serpent. You will now find an astonishing connection to all the mythologies presented thus far in the book, in both the rise and fall of the Nephilim and everything in this book. But as always, let's go back a little bit and start at the beginning. In the Dark Ages. Ready for a little history lesson? I know you love history. Come on. If you're going to be listening to my stuff, you got to get used to history. I love history because the history enlightens a scene. It opens the door and sheds light on something. It's like finding a sense that works to something that you think is legend or mythology or an old story. And when you find things that it would be like saying, "Oh, I heard the story of George Washington cut down the cherry tree," and everybody's, "Oh, that's myth." Well, then someday an archaeologist stumbles upon an axe that said, "With this axe, George Washington," and so on. You get what I mean? Lame example, but that's the idea. When you start piecing together historical events to big questions, it really sheds the light on the scene. That's why I like history so much. So you ready for a little history lesson? For roughly 300 years between the 5th and the 8th centuries AD, the Merovingians, sometimes referred to by their counterparts as the long-haired kings, as they wore their hair long in ostentatious comparison to the closer cropped hairstyles of the rest of the Franks. We're talking Frankish now. Were a Salian Frankish dynasty that came into power ruling the region known as Francia, largely synonymous with ancient Gaul, inclusive of modern-day France, as the regional name implies. From the 3rd century on, the Salian Franks appear in the in the historical record as warlike Germans, Germanic barbarians and pirates, bitter ancestral enemies of the Gallic Celts, and avowed allies of the Romans known as laity, a word used by the Romans to denote the barbarian tribes, literally babblers of outland tongues, that is, foreigners, people from outside the empire, who gave them fealty, serving as underlords, serfs, who swore allegiance and provided soldiers for the Roman armies, resulting in a ragtag alliance with Rome. This granted them a right to be the first Germanic tribes settling permanently on Roman land. In 358, they entered into political agreement with the Romans and moved into the region known as Tuxandria, which comprises roughly the area of current-day Holland and Belgium. By the 7th century, the Salians fully adopted Frankish identity and gradually dropped their identification with Salian roots and heritage altogether. It's interesting to note that the Merovingian kings operated under a rather socialistic system of governance, as defined by current-day standards of socialism. The king redistributed conquered wealth and real estate among his followers, and this was not just given to the nobility, as it apparently extended to the indentured peasantry. Some scholars have attributed this to the Merovingians as lacking a manageable understanding of public affairs. But there's also the view that they knew precisely what they were doing, and this is an act meant to foster loyalty among their people. That's a great way to get the people loyal to you. It was the son of Merovius, or Merovic, the ruler from whom the name Merovingian is derived, the leader of the Salian Franks, Childeric I, 457 to 481, that was his days, who founded the Merovingian dynasty. His son Clovis I, 481 to 511, however, was the man who united the Gallic tribes and territories under Merovingian rule. After his death, the Merovingian family seemed to be in a constant state of infighting and back-and-forth skirmishes for power. But when threatened by outsiders, the Merovingians always presented a unified front, standing together with unified purpose and intent. They were the ultimate power in that region. And during the final century of Merovingian rule, the dynasty was increasingly pushed into a more or less ceremonial role. In 752, Pope Zachary formally deposed the last ruler of the Merovingian dynasty, Childeric, or Kilderic, I think it's Childeric III, bringing to an end the Merovingian era. Christianity eventually started to take a foothold with the Merovingians, at least in the sense of being Christianized. An Irish monk named Columbanus, who was eventually elevated to sainthood by the church, enjoyed great influence due to his sincere friendship with Queen Bathild, the wife of Clovis II. The Merovingians established numerous monasteries throughout their empire and awarded them to their loyal lords, who funded the abbeys and monasteries, granting them bishoprics and titles as abbots. Many of them, due to their financial support, were even granted sainthoods, so you could buy sainthood. Before we go further with the Merovingians, let's take an intermediate trip, wading through the theories behind the bloodline of Jesus Christ, which will intersect us with the Merovingians once again. Next section is called Mr. and Mrs. Jesus Christ. There's an enduring, shadowy, hypothetical mythology surrounding the ancient ancestry and lineage of Jesus Christ, with the trail originating in the first century Canaanite, Palestine region, Israel, leading to the thrones of the Merovingian kings of Franco-Europe. It's been claimed that Mary Magdalene was Jesus' concubine, and Mormonism claims that Jesus was a polygamist. There are also theories that Jesus turned, of all things, atheist, married Mary Magdalene, and went to Europe. If any genuine historical data to back any of these claims existed, they've been lost to antiquity. What we have today are countless books on the topic, some rich in history and others just as rich in conspiratorial magma and speculative kookiness. So it's left to the interpretations of the reader of many of the literary works glutting the bookshelves, both fiction and nonfiction, to determine their veracity, and in lieu of any solid proof of any of this. It's a claim. In the highly intriguing, yet equally controversial book, The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, which was published in 1982, the Merovingians are presented as kings who established their power by claiming they were descended from the bloodline of Jesus Christ, who, if the claim were true, would had to have been married and producing offspring in order to leave a traceable bloodline. This book, as one might imagine, caused an immense stir around the world, and the ideas contained in the book were deemed blasphemous enough for it to be banned in some Roman Catholic dominated countries. Response from the historical and academic fields was quite negative, and the critics of the book tore it to shreds, claiming that the bulk of the claims, ancient mysteries, and conspiracy theories presented as fact were nothing short of pseudo-historical. Famed book critic Anthony Burgess wrote of the book, quote, "It is typical of my unregenerable soul that I can only see this as a marvelous theme for a novel," end quote. Dan Brown did just that and utilized the theme for his international best-selling 2003 novel, The Da Vinci Code. I'm just noticing some of the things in the chat room. Kookiness, that's the technical term. It was a kookiness, K-O-O-K, kookiness. So there you go. And yeah, that's a pretty technical term, folks. And Chris, one of these days, maybe you'll feel you're qualified to be able to use that word. It's highly technical, and it has an etymology that goes way back into ancient archaic something or other. All right, as might be imagined, let's go on. Despite the criticisms, and even the authors of the book making statements that some elements had to be fictionalized in order to fill in the untraceable gaps in an invisible lineage of Jesus, the book presented enough historical fact as to prompt many historians off the beaten path of convention and peer review to dig a little deeper, giving us the Jesus bloodline that linked into the Merovingians. As might be imagined, the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail spawned innumerable other books and documentaries exploiting both the veracity of the claims and the criticisms made in the book. In his 1996 book, Bloodline of the Holy Grail, The Hidden Lineage of Jesus Revealed, Sir Lawrence Gardner picks up the gauntlet and presents what he said were actual pedigree charts of the lineage of Jesus of Nazareth and Mary Magdalene. Gardner maintained that these family trees proved beyond all doubt that the biblical couple were the ancestors of all royal European families, claiming that this indeed linked them to the contemporary reptilian conspiracy. Okay. Theory, just a second. I lost my flow of that sentence in the page turning. Gardner maintained that these family trees provided beyond all doubt that the biblical couple were the ancestors of all royal European families, claiming that this indeed linked them to the contemporary reptilian conspiracy theories that state all modern European royal families are alien reptilians, operating under the influence of a hidden race of extraterrestrials bent on the destruction of humanity. In his 2000 sequel, Genesis of the Grail Kings, the explosive story of genetic cloning and ancient bloodline of Jesus, Gardner makes extraordinary claims that there is physical evidence outside the biblical genealogies that the bloodline of Jesus of Nazareth could be traced back to Adam and Eve. If you're a Christian, this is already something that can be established in biblical texts, as the followers of Jesus set out to establish the blood tie between Jesus, Mary, and Joseph to the royal house of King David, and then all the way back to Noah, and then to Seth and the third son of Adam. Gardner goes on to relay that Adam and Eve were actually the first human couple, product of alien DNA experimental interbreeding with primates, conducted by the alien race we identify in ancient Sumerian texts as the Anunnaki. And I've got some footnotes for this. In the book, you can actually see some of the source points for all of this information. For instance, I'm going to deviate here. That would be number 7 in chapter 6. So if I go to my bibliography back here, chapter by chapter, I've got them listed. Chapter 6, number 7, Lawrence Gardner. It's out of his book, Genesis of the Grail Kings, The Explosive Story of Genetic Cloning in the Ancient Bloodline of Jesus. That's Lions Bay, British Columbia, Canada, Fair Winds Press in 2002. And you can see in the back, I've got quite an extensive list of all the footnotes that tie to the bibliographies chapter by chapter. So this book, as one might imagine, caused an immense stir around the world. And the ideas contained in the book were deemed blasphemous. Oh, I just jumped back a page and didn't realize it. Just jumped right into what I was talking about, and it made sense. Okay, here we go. We're talking about how Gardner claimed that Adam and Eve were the first human couple product of alien DNA testing, experimental interbreeding with primates, conducted by the alien race we identify in ancient Sumerian texts as the Anunnaki. Yeah, my footnotes have footnotes. The 2000 book Rex Deus, The True Mystery of Rennes le Chateau and the Dynasty of Jesus, by Marilyn Hopkins, Graham Simmons, and Tim Wallace Murphy, articulates another shadowy version of hidden blood ties and the theory that the bloodlines of Jesus and Mary were intricately linked to a lineage of 24 priests of the temple in Jerusalem, high priests of the temple in Jerusalem. This bloodline was known as Rex Deus, the bloodline of the kings of God, and ties to all the fantastical stories of King Solomon's possession of a ring with which he could control demonic elements to aid in the building of the temple, as well as connections to the Masons. By the way, did you know that? There were some things I found out about biblical characters. Now, every time I move now, because of that light anomaly, and I see something moving back there, my eye shifts to it, and I do it again just to see what kind of light shift it's making up there, if it's reflecting anything, if I see anything. And I was talking like this when that happened, so I keep watching. We're always watching, Wachowski. Always watching. If you're a parent, you know what that's from. So this whole idea of King Solomon possessing a ring that had power, I think that there are lots of ties to Tolkien. When he wrote Lord of the Rings, he pulled a lot of information out of a lot of this type of mythology. You saw it in the elven folk. You saw it in the kings that came from the heavens, the bright shining ones. You see it in the whole idea of Solomon possessing a ring that gave him power over demonic forces. It's said that, according to mythology, and now I don't know enough of this, but I know enough Masons that they would get on my case if I was too far off the mark on this. But Hiram Abiff was the builder of the temple of Solomon, that Solomon, contracted him. He was kind of like the contractor or the foreman. And but Solomon brought in his workers to work for him, demonic forces. And he was given power over them because he possessed the one true ring that gave him that power. Sounds very Lord of the Rings-ish. So there's a whole big story behind all of that I don't dig into very deeply here. King Solomon possessed a ring with which he could control demonic elements to aid in the building of the temple, as well as connections to the Masons. These few mentioned works represent only a small number of the host of fictional, non-fictional, and documentary books and films released on this topic since the 1980s. But they illustrate a fact. Enough evidentiary material exists to establish a case for some of these claims, which are not at all far-fetched nor gymnastics of the imagination. Simply consider the biblical Jesus of Nazareth and his first recorded public miracle launching into his public ministry, the wedding at Cana. So this whole idea of Jesus being married is not far-fetched at all. I remember talking about this very chapter and the things I write about here with one of my old seminary buddies. And he said, "Oh, that's blasphemous." And I said, "What makes it blasphemous? Why could Jesus have not been a married man?" There are so many things that establish within that text. The first miracle of Jesus, turning the water into wine, took place at the wedding of Cana. Why could this not have been his wedding? I think there's a lot of things within the text that have been removed or edited out and hidden and buried, where when you read the text, the hints are clearly there. And why they would write that out, I don't know. But there's so many facts there that prove that this was most probably his wedding. So here, let's go on. I got a partial sentence there. Hang on. In the biblical account, Jesus is in attendance at a local wedding of some person left unnamed and unmentioned in the passage in the account. Recorded in the Gospel of John, chapter 2, verses 1 to 11, Jesus' mother, her name Mary, omitted from the passage, rushes up to Jesus in a bit of a panic, telling Jesus that the party is out of wine, to which Jesus said in what seems a rather brusque reply, "Woman, what do I have to do with you? My hour has not yet come." His mother then says to the servants to do whatever Jesus tells them to do. Jesus then orders them to take all the empty pitchers and fill them with water, and to draw out some and take it to the chief steward waiter. After tasting it and not knowing where it came from, the steward congratulated the bridegroom on departing from the custom of serving the best wine first by serving it last. John adds, Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and it revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Here's the actual passage. It says this: 3 days later, there was a wedding in the village of Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there. Jesus and his disciples were guests also. When they started running low on wine at the banquet, Jesus' mother told him, "They're just about out of wine." Jesus said, "Is that any of your business, of our business, mother? Yours or mine? This isn't my time. Don't push me." She went ahead anyway, telling the servants, "Whatever he tells you, do it." 6 stoneware water pots were there, used by the Jews for ritual washings. Each one held 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus ordered the servants, "Go fill the pots with water," and they filled them to the brim. "Now fill your pitchers and take them to the host," Jesus said, and they did. When the host tasted the water that it had become wine, he didn't know what had just happened, but the servants, of course, knew. He called out to the bridegroom, "Everybody I know begins with their finest wines, and after the guests have had their fill, brings in the cheap stuff. But you've saved the best till now." This act in Cana of Galilee was the first sign Jesus gave, the first glimpse of his glory, and his disciples believed in him. My speculative contention is that this wedding is the wedding of Jesus. There are a few things to note in this passage that would tend to establish this fact. First, in first century Judea, it was a Jewish tradition, tantamount to law, that a rabbi or a teacher, somebody who's in ministry, like a pastor or a priest, must be a married man in order to be worth his salt and effective in his ministry. This miracle represents the first miracle of Jesus' public ministry. Second in the first century Judea, as well as in modern times, it was Jewish custom and tradition for the groom's family to provide the wine for the wedding. In this passage, you see Jesus' mother approaching him under some stress that the wedding has no wine. Why did she approach Jesus, and why did she seem to have some position of authority at the wedding? Was Jesus perhaps the groom? Finally, we see Jesus, the groom, ordering the servants and presenting the wedding with wine. Perhaps the text of the passage, as with so many other passages in the Bible, is presenting certain facts and omitting others, or completely redirecting the actual events to point in a different direction. As we know, the early church fathers had specific views they needed to convey in order to establish church practice and governance. And the repression of women in any position of authority seemed to govern the effort. For Jesus to have been married would have elevated a woman to a very lofty role. So they deleted the wedding and reduced Mary Magdalene to the role of prostitute, which is never stated anywhere in the biblical text. Pope Gregory the Great's homily on Luke's Gospel, dated September 14th of 591, first suggested that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. Quote, "She whom Luke calls the sinful woman, whom John calls Mary, we believe to be Mary from the 7 devils, from whom the 7 devils were ejected, according to Mark." And what did these 7 devils signify, if not all the vices? It's clear, brothers, that the woman previously used the unguent to perfume her flesh in forbidden acts. That says homily 33. Speculative as my theory may be, it's clearly apparent that the church and many denominations overtly suppress the roles of important women in the scriptures, with a few exceptions. And just as overtly, even vehemently, resist the notion that Jesus could have been a married man who produced offspring. One old Bible school friend of mine reacted quite harshly at this notion when I presented it, insisting that marriage and children would invalidate the divinity of Jesus Christ. When I asked him why, he fumbled for an intelligent answer but could provide none, reverting simply to stating that my words were heretical. And in truth, if Jesus Christ is indeed divinity, God, very God, does not the New Testament tell us that he experienced life in all points and was tempted in all points just as we are, yet without committing sin? That's Hebrews 4:15. The big question that remains unanswered is this: did Yeshua Bar Yosef, should be Jesus' name, Jesus the son of Joseph, Joshua is Jesus, the son of Joseph, Jesus of Nazareth, called the Christ, marry and father a child? And if he did, was that child the beginning of a bloodline that could be traced or discovered? And did it merge into the ruling class of the Merovingian kings? As the theory goes, Jesus married Mary of Magdala, a woman from whom he cast out 7 demons, thought to be 7 illnesses and infirmities, and who became one of his most ardent disciples, even to the point where after Jesus' death, resurrection, and ascension, she was referred to by the other disciples and followers of Jesus as Miriamne, the great teacher. According to the non-canonical Gospel of Philip, a Gnostic gospel of the New Testament, apocrypha, dating to the 3rd century, Mary Magdalene was revered as the great teacher, establishing her as the heir apparent to the living philosophies of Jesus, her husband. Taken from the Gospel of Philip is this passage: "There were 3 who always walked with the Lord, Mary his mother, and her sister, and Magdalene, the one who was called his companion. His sister and his mother and his companion were each a Mary." That's in the Gospel of Philip. There's another passage from the Gospel of Philip referring to Mary Magdalene, but as is common with millennia's old documents, it's incomplete due to the damage to the original manuscript, and several words are missing. The best scholarly guesses as to what they were shown here are in brackets, and I've got it in the text here, and I'll describe it to you verbally. Most notably and frustratingly, there is a hole in the manuscript after the phrase, quote, and used to kiss her often on her blank. Fill in the gap. The passage appears to be telling of Jesus kissing Mary Magdalene, and Jesus goes on to use a parable to explain to the disciples why he loved her more than he loved them. And it says this. And by the way, isn't that interesting? You see that a lot in old texts, cuneiform texts, manuscripts written on parchment, and oilcloth and things like that. That many times there's damage to the manuscripts and the words are missing. So you've got to fill in the words. And in this particular case, what was very interesting, he's walking with the disciples, and the passage in the book of Philip says that he kisses Mary Magdalene, but it's saying where he's kissing her. And as they're walking along, Jesus kisses Mary on the. There's a hole in the manuscript, so we don't know where he was kissing her. Was it lips? Was it hand? Was it neck? Shoulder? Feet? But they're walking along, so you can start to surmise. The passage says this: as for the wisdom who is called the barren, she is the mother of the angels, and the companion of, and in parentheses I've got it because this is missing, the Savior was M-A-R, because there's a Y on the passage, and capital M-A, and then missing our G-D-A, and then L-E-N-E. So it's got the companion of, it's got a big gap, and then parts of Mary Magdalene's name that you can fill in pretty easily. So here, it kind of looks like this. For lack of a better way to do this, you can see right here, it talks about, you can see in the parentheses or the brackets, all the missing parts of this passage that they filled in, because there was big holes and eaten away spots within the text itself. So what they think it said was that, and they look at context and they try to fill in the blanks. And so it says, as for the wisdom who is called the barren, she is the mother of the angels, and the companion of the Savior was Mary Magdalene. Christ loved Mary more than all the disciples. Now, what's interesting there is the words Christ loved are completely gone. So they have to build a supposition out of the context. And so it starts with a big blank, a hole in the parchment. Then it says Mary with the A-R-Y of Mary missing. M, more than blank, all the disciples. And used to kiss her blank on her blank. So as they're reconstructing this, they're trying to figure out what fits the text. And so they filled it in by saying to kiss her softly on her hand. The rest of the disciples were offended by it and expressed disapproval. Now the whole sentence, the disciples were offended by it and expressed disapproval, was missing from the original text. There's a big rip and hole in it. But it continues by saying, they said to him, why do you love her more than all of us? The Savior answered and said to them, why do I not love you like her? When a blind man and one who sees are both together in the darkness, they are no different from one another. When the light comes, then he who sees will see the light, and he who is blind will remain in darkness. And that's the end of the passage. However, the word hand in this passage, as I said, is not necessarily the word after kiss her. On her blank. It may have been cheek, forehead, lips, or feet, or simply show respect. The holy bloodline of Jesus is nothing more than a theory, folks, filled with speculative evidences and magnificent stories, but as with other theories of this sort, it's filled with conjecture, filler content, and unsubstantiable facts. The theory goes on to state that Jesus Christ had a natural child with Mary Magdalene, named Sarah, Hebrew for princess, who was taken to France to keep her safe. either during Magdalene's pregnancy or as a young child. It's Sarah's blood descendants who, in later centuries, founded the Merovingian dynasty of the early kings of France. The theory goes on to state that a secret order protects these royal claimants because they may be the literal descendants of Jesus and Mary, his wife. Mary Magdalene, at the very least, of King David and the high priest Aaron, that these were in their lineage. This secret society, known as the Priory of Sion, has a long and an illustrious history dating back to the First Crusade, starting with the creation of the Knights Templar as its military and financial front. The priory is said to be led by a Grand Master or a notanier, one who steers through murky waters, and is devoted to reestablishing the Merovingian dynasty on the hereditary thrones of Europe and Jerusalem. Now, there's something very interesting. There's been a lot of study done on the Priory of Sion, of course, since Dan Brown's book. And it has been found that the Priory of Sion is by some believed to be complete fiction, totally fabricated for some of these stories and these theories and these conspiracies. A very good thing to watch. You can find him. Tony Robinson. If any of you were Blackadder fans, if you remember Blackadder with, what the hell's his name? Rowan Atkinson. And then Tony Robinson was Baldric, his sidekick. Very inept, empty-headed village idiot type of assistant. And that guy, he went on to do a lot of historical and archaeological work in real life and produced several shows. And he produced a documentary on looking for some of these things, and the Priory of Sion was one of them. And I think he debunks it pretty handily. But it still is left with the mystery of did it or did it not really exist. You can go find him on YouTube if you look up Tony Robinson. And you'll be able to find some information on that. Very interesting stuff. Nigel, you said you know Tony personally. Lovely guy. Did you know that Tony went and shot some documentaries at my friend John Ward and Maria's archaeological site this last year of Gebel El Silsila? And those aired on British television. I don't think they've aired on American television yet. But Nigel, maybe you've seen those. I don't know. So that was a lot of fun for John and Maria, especially since John and I used to joke around about those characters. There was once in some filming that John and I did, and I looked at him and I said something to the effect of, I called him Baldric. I said, "Hey, Baldric," and we laughed. So there you go. So it must have been fun for them to be there. Let's see. Historically speaking, the Roman Catholic Church is said to have attempted to exterminate all remnants of this dynasty as well as their guardians, the Cathars and the Templars, during the Inquisition. Their goal, according to Jesus conspiratorialists, was to maintain power through the apostolic succession of Peter instead of the hereditary succession of Mary Magdalene. So the mythos goes. A variation on the bloodline theory is that Jesus didn't die on the cross, but survived the torturous event, after which he fled to Kashmir, returning to Srinagar, where he had originally been influenced by Buddhist teachings. It was there that he died of old age, and the biblical accounts of his resurrection were enhanced by his followers. What do you think of that stuff, folks? It's possible if you step outside the faith and that's not your faith, and you look and say there are some possibilities as alternatives to this story. But in order to listen to that stuff, especially if you are a Christian and staunchly Christian or avowed Christian, these are hard theories to follow. You'll dismiss them outright because of a faith. But sometimes you have to step back from what might be your faith and look at something from the outside. Now, I'm not saying this theory is accurate. I'm saying it's there. So the question is asked. It has to be asked. Are these things possible? There's apparently some evidence. There's some people I know that have written whole books on these topics. All right. Let's see. Let's move on here. Let me find my place. A variation on the bloodline theory is that Jesus didn't die. He went to Kashmir. It was there he died of old age. This theory is given merit by close comparisons of the teachings of Jesus in the Gnostic Gospel of St. Thomas, paralleling classical Buddhist sutras. The theory also has parallels with other stories of Jesus' disciples fleeing to foreign lands, such as the journey of Joseph of Arimathea to England after the death of Jesus, or Britannia at the time, taking with him a piece of the thorn from Jesus' crown of thorns, which he planted on Wayall Hill in Glastonbury, England. The tree that grows there across the valley from Glastonbury Tor is said to be a direct descendant of the tree that sprouted from the thorn planted by Joseph. And a flowering sprig is sent to the monarch of England every Christmas. A tradition started during the reign of James I, the royal sponsor of the 1611 King James Version of the Bible in the early 1600s. So, did you know all that? That's interesting. Now, when I was in Glastonbury, I did not go see the holy thorn tree, but it exists. And by the way, somebody vandalized that. It had been hundreds of years growing the way it was. And somebody went up one night in the dark and cut off all the branches. Must have been somebody who disagreed with the theory or something like that. But it was said that Joseph of Arimathea, if you remember him from the Jesus story, he's the man who stepped forward and offered his tomb. And so they, and he was also one of the Pharisees. And it's said that he left and he went to Britannia and took with him some of this thorn tree and planted it in Great Britain at what is now Glastonbury Tor, that area across the valley from Glastonbury Tor. If you've never been to Glastonbury Tor, well worth going to Glastonbury. If you can get past the fact that Glastonbury has pretty much become a pagan Wiccan ghetto, but it's a wonderful place to visit if you're in, especially if you're into that stuff. But in case you didn't know, Glastonbury Tor, it's this mound of a hill that rises up out of the valley, and atop is a tower, is an old tower from a cathedral that had been built there that Henry VIII tore down, but that tower is left standing. And this Glastonbury Tor is said to be the ancient Isle of Avalon, which was in the Lake Country, according to the Arthurian legends. And Avalon, of course, is very closely associated with the Arthurian legends. And if, by the way, if you go to Glastonbury Tor and you climb the hill and you stand at the top and you look out, you can see that you are in a huge, going to the horizon almost, a lake basin that used to be like an inland sea. And it's spotted with all these hills all through as you look through the distance. These were the islands that were in the Great Lake District. And it's known that back in the early first millennia, early first century, that it was recorded that these were the Lake Country, the Lake District, the first few hundred years going up into the Dark Ages and so on, that this area was a big lake or a series of interconnected lakes with all these islands on it, and Glastonbury was one of the isles. So that is a place with Joseph of Arimathea coming and planting the sprig on the hill opposite Glastonbury Tor. That is the place by legend that was connected to the Arthurian legends. All right, let's move on here. Next section is the beast from the sea. Now, let me just see before I go on. Can you see it, Scotty? See my theory. They're awesome. Amanda says they're awesome. Cancel that. Awesome at hide and seek. We all need trophies. See my theory. You can see it, Scotty. I'm not sure what you're referring to. I've got to look back a little bit. Amanda, sorry about that. I just happened to see that there. Trying to scroll a little bit, see what I can see. Let me move. I got to move this so I can see things just a little better here. All right. There we go. Let's see. I'm just looking for questions in the chat. If I missed something, thank you, Audrey. I was reading. If you've got a question, throw it in all caps for me so it catches my eye, as Audrey said. Look into the work of Anatoly Fomenko. Incredible. I'll do that. Let's see. Without an open mind, totally and summarily rejected. Exactly, Michelle. That's not what they wanted us to know, said Amanda. They're awesome at hide and seek. We all need trophies. See my theory. Can you see it, Scotty? I'm not sure what you're referring there to there, Amanda. Have you composed yourself? Nigel asks Amanda. She just broke her phone. Uh-oh. Sorry to hear that, Amanda. So this is the stuff that's going on in the chat room while we're reading. Joseph of Arimathea saw a great meme regarding that today. Okay, let's move on. Apparently that wasn't as important as I thought it was. I'll go further up. Okay, hang on, folks. Let me do that. Let me scroll back a little bit, see what's going on here. Amanda, would you say this information is true? So I must have to go back further. This was before Nigel said he knew Tony. Ancient Bohemian was Yeshua Reptilian. There we go. Okay. I think I'm getting into the context, the meat of this. Hang on. Let's see. Michelle says we need decoder rings. I'll go along with that sometimes. Love blankety blank. Yeah, exactly. I think, Amanda, you're referring to the text we read from the Gospel of Philip. Shane Stevenson. Now look, by the way, behind me, folks, you can see how things move around, but you don't see light anomalies. You see shadows and reflections. Audrey says Jesus was a human, a Jewish man. I think people tend to forget that because of what is taught about him being the Christ. Well, exactly. Jesus was Jewish, and Christianity is really just a sect of Judaism, if you will. Basically saying, would you just look at her bros? Let's see. So Shane says, missed the start. Scotty says, Nigel. Let's see. The Da Vinci Code. History of the Merovingians. I read a great novel regarding Sarah and her descendants and can't remember the title. That's from Suze. Amanda says, Ancient Bohemian. Michelle Dunbar, was Yeshua a reptilian or was he the Magdalene? I actually don't think he was either. I think he was married to Magdalene. Amanda, message retracted, it says, on my end. Let's see. Hopped on late. Had a frosted cake, says Michelle. Questions in the chat. Okay, then we're all the way back up. So I've missed something along the way here. Sorry, folks. 8:47. I don't have the timestamps coming up here, but Amanda's kids locked her out of her computer. Congrats, Amanda. Kids, gotta love them. Let's see. He made wine to seduce Mary Magdalene. Maybe. I think he was getting married to her, though. Was it the Dead Sea Scrolls mentioned Jesus kissing Mary Magdalene? No. Patriots Corner, Lewis. This was the Gospel of Philip. Something to keep kind of in mind as we talk about some of this stuff is that we have 4 Gospels in the New Testament. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Do you know there were over 60 Gospels written in that first 200 years after the time of Christ? And the reason we only have 4 is because of something I read about in the rise and fall of the Nephilim. When Constantine convoked the Council of Nicaea and began the councils that were deciding amongst them the many things they talked about, and decided for church polity was what books of the Bible were actually inspired by God and which ones weren't. Which should they keep? Which ones should they throw out? Well, at that time, they looked at all these Gospels, and they ended up only keeping the four: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And the rest they threw out because they could not come to unanimous decisions that they were indeed part of the inspired works of God. And so they cast them out of the Bible. Some of them made it to the apocryphal books. But all of these Gospels, roughly 55 or more Gospels, were thrown out as being not real, fake, not inspired by God. And you're only left with the four. The problem is, I think the four you've got are just the ones that the church wanted to sanction. And those became part of our New Testament. While the other books are still out there somewhere. Not all of them have been found, if I'm right about that. But, they had the ones they found add up to that number of over 60 of them. And but they were considered not. And one of them is like the Gospel of Judas Iscariot, the one who supposedly betrayed Jesus, gives a completely different version of events. So the question had to be asked, was that fictional by somebody trying to undo the gospel, or was it something else? Was it true? So that's very interesting, was where Jesus, it's actually Judas, according to that gospel, was somebody who was doing what Jesus wanted him to do. Jesus told him he was the man of all the disciples who got the mysteries, and that Jesus was asking him, you're the one that has to betray me. And here's why. And he gave him the reasons. And it was Judas who went ahead and did this at Jesus' beckoning. That's why you have in the Gospels where it records the Last Supper, it says Jesus looked at Judas during supper. And he says, that thing I told you to do, you need to go do it. That which you were appointed to do, go do, I think Jesus says. Something like that. So anyway, I digress. But all of that stuff is coming from some of these Gospels. All right. Let's see. God's spells that enchant one to give up their sovereignty and freedom to another entity. That's a good play on words, Chris, indeed. All based on a timeline between 1153 and 1186, apparently, says Nigel. All right. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to there, Nigel. I'm sure it'll click in eventually here. All right, here we go. The beast from the sea. Buried in obscure antiquity, there is a legend surrounding Merovius, the founder of the Merovingian dynasty, in which he made claims to having been, he made claims to having been sired by two different fathers. Despite the more recent claims that the Merovingians descended from the bloodlines of Jesus Christ, predicated, of course, on the notion that Jesus was indeed married to Mary Magdalene and fathered a child with her who carried on his lineage in ancient France, King Clodion, the human father of Merovius, had a strange beast of the sea. Oh, and a strange beast of the sea were the progenitors of the first Merovingian king. Merovius's mother was already pregnant with her son by King Clodion, already pregnant by King Clodion, when she went swimming in the surf and encountered the beast of the sea. The legend goes like this. Despite the carefully listed genealogies of his time, the heritage of Merovius was strangely obscured in the monastic annals. Although the rightful son of Clodion, he was nonetheless said by historian Priscus to have been sired by an arcane sea creature, the Bestia Neptunus. The Sicambrian Franks, from whose female line the Merovingians emerged, were associated with Grecian Arcadia before migrating to the Rhineland. As we have seen, they called themselves the Numidge, or the Numage, people of the New Covenant, just as the Essenes of Qumran had once been known. It was the Arcadian legacy that was responsible for the mysterious sea beast, the Bestia Neptunus, as symbolically defined in the Merovingian ancestry. The relevant sea lord was King Pallas, Pallas, a god of old Arcadia. His predecessor was the great Oceanus. The immortal sea lord was said to be ever incarnate in the dynasty of ancient kings, whose symbol was a fish, or was the traditional symbol of Jesus, as was the traditional symbol of Jesus. That was all written by Lawrence Gardner in the bloodline of the Holy Grail. All right, let's move on here. The Bestius Neptunus was worshipped in classical antiquity as the Roman god Neptune and as Poseidon in Greek mythology. Neptune was the mythological god of the sea who is said to have founded Atlantis, which is the pagan version of the antediluvian civilization that existed prior to the great flood of Noah, in which God wipes out all humanity while purging the earth of the Nephilim, the offspring of the Elohim in Genesis chapter 7. In the Apostle John's visions on the Isle of Patmos, he records an image of the Antichrist as the beast that rises out of the sea. This appearance of the Bestia Neptunus in the book of Revelation has interesting linkages to the Merovingian legend, especially in light of the fact that the Merovingian monarchs are said to have demonic connections. It says in Revelation 13, 1-2, "And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion, and the dragon gave him power, and his seat and great authority." The name Merovius is a name created from 2 conjoined French words, mer, meaning sea, and vir, meaning werewolf or dragon, hence beast from the sea. The book of Revelation refers to the dragon in specific terms as being none other than Satan the devil. "And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. And the great dragon were cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him." That was Revelation 12:9. Jeannie Griffin's sound went out. Sorry to hear that, Jeannie, if you can hear me. If not, that didn't mean anything. That was gibberish. So it is interesting to make note at this spot regarding the 2 comparatives that stand out in this Merovingian mythology. The first is the relation to the great beast who rises up out of the sea. In the Sumerian mythology of Enki-Ea, it is said that he is the lord of the earth and the lord of the Abzu, the great underworld sea, atop of which lay the snake marsh. It is the connectivity to the snake that the second comparative comes into view, the dragon, which is simply an archaic derivative of the snake and the ancient serpent. Some of the books mentioned, the Bloodline of the Holy Grail, Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the Da Vinci Code, were popular books marketed for mass consumption and sold millions of copies. As such, conspiratorialists held them up as being nothing less than propaganda tools that conceal the true origins of the Merovingian race. This propaganda is obviously something masterminded from behind the mystical scenes. Excuse me. I'm drying my throat out here. Sorry about that. This propaganda is obviously something masterminded from behind the mystical scenes in the mists of demonic and otherworldly ether. For their esoteric allusion to the Merovingians' legendary progenitor, King Merovius, having been sired by a mysterious beast of the sea, is an overt claim that the bloodlines of the Merovingians were of literal satanic descent. The demonic origins and history of the Merovingian dynasty, also known as the Dragon Dynasty, in honor of the great red dragon, the Pendragon, of Revelation 12 and 13, are revealed in less available insider sources, such as Gardner's Realm of the Ring Lords and Kenneth Grant and the Merovingian Mythos, both published by Dragon Key Press. And it's interesting, this whole red dragon, once again, goes back to the Pendragons of the Arthurian legend, Uther Pendragon, the red dragon banner, the red dragon. All right. Something very interesting here is what I get into with the Irish mythology now. Hang on here. I just want to see where we're at for our time. It's 11:11, by the way, Central Standard Time, if you did not know. All right. We have a good 20 pages left now. Here we go. This was a 30-page chapter. Here we go. It's 11:11. Let's see how we do. The Tuatha De Danann. In Irish mythology, it's said that a race of kings descended from the heavens to the ancient Celts of Ireland. These tall, bright, shining creatures were elegant and beautiful and brought with them the secret knowledge of the gods. Although the Tuatha represent a caste of Irish elemental beings, there are also accounts of them being flesh and blood, conquerors of the Fir Bolg, one of the more ancient races inhabiting Ireland, coming down and invading from the four northern cities of the Falias, Gorius, Murias, and Phineas, where they acquired their occult skills and their magical attributes. Turning the page. Tuatha De Danann, roughly, but imprecisely, translates as peoples or children of the goddess Danu. In the Old Irish, Tuatha means people, tribe, nation. De is the genitive case of Dia, meaning God, goddess, supernatural being, object of worship. They were often referred to simply as the Tuatha or the Tua, or the Tuatha De, which also was used in early Irish Christian texts as a name for the Israelite diaspora, the scattered Jews. That in and of itself is an interesting historical reference, as Danu has also been rendered Anu. The reference, if not already obvious, creates an interesting link between Israel and ancient Sumerian mythology of the Anu, the Anunnaki. According to Libar Gabala Erin, the Book of the Taking of Ireland, the Middle Irish title of a loose collection of poems and prose narratives recounting the mythical origins and history of the Irish from the creation of the world down to the Middle Ages, they descended to Ireland in dark clouds and landed on the mountains of Conmach Rain in Connacht, bringing a darkness over the sun for 3 days and 3 nights. In another version of the story, less steeped in the mistiness of legend, the Tuatha landed in a fleet of sea vessels on the shores of what is modern-day Connemara, Ireland. As if to seal their resolve, they burned all their ships, so as to provide themselves no mode of retreat. The rising smoke from the fires is said to be the basis for the myth that says they arrived in smoke from the skies. A poem in the Liber Gabala, Erin says of their travel, "It is God who suffered them through, though he restrained them. They landed with horror and lofty deed. In their cloud of mighty combat of specters, upon a mountain of Connacht, without distinction to discerning Ireland, without ships a ruthless course, the truth was not known beneath the sky of stars, whether they were of heaven or of earth." After a series of wars, it is said that the Tuatha De Danann receded into the hollow hills and eventually became known as the Elven folk of Celtic lore. It's interesting to note that the El, E-L, of Elven is a derivative of the ancient Sumerian Elil and the Hebrew name Elohim. The connectivity between the mythological Tuatha De Danann and the Nephilim is well worth recognition, as there are perhaps etymological descendants in the same vein, again, as Elil and Ea are to Elohim and Yahweh. On a literary note, the Tuatha De Danann are the basis for J.R.R. Tolkien's tall, elegant, bright, shining elven people of Lothlorien. Tolkien had his finger on the pulse of the shadowy history and was obviously onto something. That's what he used as his backdrop, by the way. Very, very, very interesting. So these tall, these tall, elegant, shining, radiance creatures, these kings from the heavens, became the elven folk of the Hollow Hills. And of course, Tolkien used that picture of who they were in his writings, his fictional writings. So it must be good and true. The bright, shining ones, exactly, Sue. Tuatha De Anunnaki? The ancient people of the Tuatha De Danann were the supernatural tribe of the pre-Achaean archaeological goddess Danae of Argos, or perhaps of the Aegean mother goddess Danu. But their true name, rendered in its older form, was Tuatha De Anu. As such, they were the people or tribe of Anu, the great sky god of the Anunnaki. And that was Sir Lawrence Gardner, Realm of the Ring Lords, The Myths and the Magic of the Grail Quest. The Canaanite territory of northern Israel is said to have once been occupied by the Israelite tribe of Dan, who, during the days of the Bible's Great Exodus around 1446 BC, is said to have separated from Moses and the rest of the Israelites, traveling to the north. There, the Danites encountered the worship of Baal or Pan and became involved in the pagan fertility rites practiced by the indigenous Canaanite peoples at Mount Hermon, the very place where, according to the book of Enoch, the sons of God descended to the earth and made a pact to go in among human women and have children with them, bequeathing the Nephilim. And if you've been following all these readings, and you were here when we did the rise and fall of the Nephilim, we spoke about that extensively, how the Nephilim came down to Mount Hermon. Now, it's very interesting. Since I wrote this book, I saw a documentary done by Shimka Yakubovici. If you don't know who he is, look him up. Shimka, Shimca, Yakubovici. It's like Yakub Ovici. You can figure out the spelling. He did a show called The Naked Archaeologist, and he's an Israelite, or an Israeli, I guess you'd say in modern days. And he's a historian and archaeologist, and he wrote some great stuff about the tribe of Dan, saying that they went north before the parting of the Red Sea, or just afterwards, went north on what would now be the route of the Suez Canal, and they sailed across the sea to Mesopotamia and into northern Israel along the coast. And that's where they settled. They did not stick with the Hebrews or the Israelites during the 40 years sojourn in the wilderness, but they went off on their own and said, it's been good. The Exodus was great. We're not going to wander around nomadically. We're going to go settle. Sayonara. And they took off and they went to northern Israel. Now, the people of the Israelite tribe of Dan, I want to make sure I'm in the right place, yes, intermingled with the Canaanite Tuatha De Danann, also known as the Dragon Lords of the Anu, said to be the offspring of the ancient Sumerian Anunnaki tribe. This is also one of the interpretations of the sons of God, intermingling with the daughters of men, referenced in the Genesis chapter 6 story of the Nephilim. One of the human-based interpretations of the story is that the children of Israel, as represented by the tribe of Dan, broke the law of God and intermarried with the Canaanites in the region of Mount Hermon. Now, this is just a different interpretation of that story, where the Elohim were said to have descended. Cultural values of the day did not allow for the women of Israel to intermingle with the men of another culture, so only the men were said to have taken Canaanite brides from the Tuatha De Danann. Hence the basis of the story for the sons of God intermingling with the daughters of men. From there, the integrated tribe, Dan and Danann, Danu, Anu, So it's interesting, even the similarity in names. The tribe of Dan of Israel and the Danaan, or the Danu, the Anu, migrated to the north and the west, settling along the way in the European and Scandinavian regions as a conquering nomadic people, replacing those that they conquered with their own traditions blended with the Canaanite Anunnaki serpent culture. I again find the similarities and connectivity staggering. The Tuatha De Danann, the Danites, the tribe of Dan, and their linkage to the dragon lords, the Anunnaki, and the serpent. Are these simply tricks of word similarities, or are the coincidences far too great to overlook? Yet another version of the origins of the Tuatha De Danann, the dragon lords of the Anu, before settling in Ireland around 800 BCE, is that they were the descendants of the Black Sea princes of Scythia, now known as the Ukraine. Like the original dynastic pharaohs, they traced their ancestry to the great Pendragons, note, Uther and Arthur Pendragon of the Arthurian legends, of Mesopotamia, and from them sprang the kingly lines of the ancient Britons, the Irish Brutini, and the Picts, the indigenous peoples of northern Scotland. In Wales, the Tuatha founded the royal house of Gwynedd. I think that's how it's pronounced in Welsh. Whereas in Cornwall, in the southwest of England, they were the sacred gentry known as the Pictseed, connected with the early Merlin or Myrddin and Tintagel, the legendary Cornish birthplace of Ireland. The Pictsea, by the way, the Pict-She, in Irish, the Pict with the S-I-D-H-E, she, the she having to do with like the Banshee and the fairy folk and all of those things. The Pict-She or the Pixie came from that as well. So from a single cast of the original Blood Royale, whether known as the Sangreal, the Albigens, or the Ring Lords, we discover many of the descriptive terms which sit at the very heart of popular folklore. For here in this one noble race, we have the elves, the fairies, the pixies, not beguiling little folk, but distinguished kings and queens of the dragon succession. That was from Sir Lawrence Gardner, Realm of the Lord King of the Ring Lords. The Psalter of Cashel, the Psalter, like a psalm, the Psalter of Cashel, the Lost Book of Munster, states, the Tuatha De Danann ruled in Ireland for about 2 centuries, and were highly skilled in architecture and other arts from their long residence in Greece. According to the Psalter of Cashel, the Tuatha De Danann were regarded as the descendants of Danius, the son of Belus, who went with his 50 daughters to Argos, the home of his ancestral Io. In Irish legends, the Tuatha De Danann, considered to be demigods, were said to have possessed a grail-like vessel. They were teachers of ancient wisdom and the founders of Druidic priesthood. Janice, good night. Nice to see you here. Glad your brain feels enhanced. I know it's late. It's 11:24 on a Friday night. Let's see where we get in the next half an hour, if we can get close to wrapping this chapter. Let's see. They were the teachers of the ancient wisdom and the founders of the Druidic priesthood. As you can see, mythology melds with history. In the vaguely historical, mostly pseudo-anthropological works of Sitchin, the Anunnaki are space travelers who descended in linguistically forced fiery rockets. In anthropological research, they are the deified kings of the ancient Sumerians, whose descendants migrated north to Black Sea region and south to Palestine, encountering other ancient peoples and merging cultures and language. All right? It's pretty neat stuff as far as I'm concerned. In a Merovingian sense, and in accordance with modern reptilian mythology, these are the ancient ancestral Euro-Semitic people who forged the bloodlines of the royal families of the Franks, not to mention the royal houses of Europe's history. Now let's move on to the Holy Grail. The Holy Grail has for centuries been linked to the legends of King Arthur and his knights in the Round Table. It was a quest on which the mythical king sent his mighty men of valor. In more modern interpretations, this Grail quest has been seen as less a quest for an object, the cup of Jesus used at the Last Supper, but one of finding and identifying the bloodline of Jesus Christ, the Holy Son of God who was the divine Savior of humanity. Take into consideration the aforementioned migration of the Tuatha De Danann and their purported establishment of the royal lines of Wales and Cornwall, both of which have connectivity to the Arthurian legends, and you'll see the linkage between the legendary quest for the Grail and the quest for the blood heirs of Jesus. Yet this dynastic line of kings, who claim to have descended from a hidden bloodline, were not any part of the Christianity we recognize today. They were known as sorcerer kings and dragon lords, some of whom claimed to be not only descendants of the bloodline of Jesus Christ, but also the Luciferian bloodline, which seems an outright contradiction to the former. The Merovingian kings were said to have descended from the Atlantean diaspora, the remnant of the inhabitants of Atlantis who had escaped the destruction of that mythological region, fleeing to the Pyrenees Mountains region, bringing with them their abilities as occult adepts and practitioners of arcane sciences and the esoteric arts. The Merovingians, in fact, were often called sorcerer kings or thaumaturge kings, sorcerers, workers of miracles, and practitioners of the black arts. These are the descendants of the Grail. They're heirs of the bloodline of Christ. These are the things that delve into the darker side of the Judeo-Christian history and lore, the mysteries of God, if you will. And they end up painting God in a very different light than we were taught in Sunday school or synagogue, which is why they are deemed as heretical and blasphemous to the church. But what if they are true? How would this affect your faith or your adherence to what you believed you knew from the Bible? Or would it simply send you back into those pages to dig deeper for answers? And I'm of course, speaking to Abrahamic culture here and religions. Perhaps even into prayer to ask if that holy God is truly there in the form you once understood him. Digging into more rabbinic lore, there's another version of the story of Cain, the son of Eve, in which he was not the son of Adam, which we've already established several times over between this book and the rise and fall of the Nephilim, but of the fallen angel Samael, whose name loosely equates to Lucifer. We have already established, textually speaking, that the serpent in the garden was a character called Nakosh, in accordance with the Hebrew of the Genesis text. But according to this obscure rabbinic version of this particular bit of Hebrew lore, it was Samael who appeared to Eve as the serpent, the Nakosh, seducing her. And of course, and if Samael's name is roughly the same as the Luciferian character, that gives you the connection there. Let's see. Whoever it was who actually appeared as the serpent isn't as important as the fruit of that union. Eve's firstborn twin son, Cain. If the Merovingians knew of this rabbinic version of the story, which they no doubt did, and it could have been the basis of their alleged assertion that they possessed, flowing in their bodies, the blood of both Christ and Lucifer. And the idea that Cain was the offspring of a superior intelligence was already a well-established teaching of the Cainite Gnostics, of which the Merovingians were also sure to have legitimate knowledge. An alternate version of the Cain saga, equally Luciferian in its connotations, says that he was the son of Adam's first wife, Lilith, who was also a candidate for the serpent, Nakosh in the Garden of Eve. Did you know that? That Lilith was also associated with the serpent in the garden? According to rabbinic lore, she had been the consort of Elohim before her fall from grace and descent to the earth. Let's see. Suze, I see a lot of text here in the chat room, so I wanted to see this. Robin Pruitt, my name is Welsh, but my father's Irish. He didn't teach me anything about Irish history and folklore. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. My name is Welsh Roberts. I'm Welsh primarily. We're Roberts from Robards. The source point of our name is Wales. I've traced my own family tree back into the 1500s from Wales, so it's interesting. Let's see. I know about Amanda. You've done a lot of digging into your family. And Sue says the Bolari, the armed retinue of the Duke, and the social structure of the early Bavaria. It was of non-Germanic origin, similar to that of Caratania. Did it originate from the ancient Venus Veneti? I'm not sure. The famous chalice of Tessalo in the Abbey of Kremsmünster in today's Upper Austria. And you guys are talking about searching and finding the puzzle, Amanda says. Andrea from Kepler 621, so glad I caught you live. This is fantastic. Nice to have you here, Andrea, by the way. Welcome. And Jeff's friend Wayne did a whole series about a possible correlation between Lilith and Samael. I missed that with Wayne. Anyway, move on from that. I got nothing to say about that. I found this info, left France to Byblos, then the kids on the ship to Oz in the 1800s. Okay, that's back to your family, Amanda. So Lilith is described as a Welsh woman and called a red dragon. The red dragon was the symbol of the Welsh, and that's right. As a matter of fact, I've got my Welsh flag is hanging up on the wall over there. So with the big Welsh griffin or dragon on it. All right, let me move on here. The Lilith Samael version of the story also bears great connectivity to the Grail saga, insofar as, according to this account, the angelic demonic pairing produces a son of their own, who seems to play a recurring role in the entire Grail mythos, Asmodeus. Not only is Asmodeus said to have played the central role in building the Temple of Solomon, the edifice from which the Knights Templar took their name, but he is also represented in the dominant statue at the entrance to Rennes-le-Château in France, which has enormous legendary connections to the Grail mythos. The recurrence of the character of Asmodeus and the connection to the Grail lore gives credence to the notion that both he and the descendants of Cain may in fact have shared kindred ancestry. In some traditions, it has been said that it was Asmodeus, not God, whom Moses called upon to part the Red Sea. Though portrayed as a demon or devil figure, the name Asmodeus reveals that he may not always have been viewed as such, for Asmodeus translates simply to Lord God, or Ashma, Lord, and Deus, God. Asmodeus bears the same brand of duality found in the serpent deities of the ancient Egypt, Sumer, and myriad other cultures we've mentioned in this book, which happen to be only the tip of the iceberg. So again, we have to ask ourselves, what is it we think we really know for sure? On an even more intriguing observance are the four French words positioned above the sculpture of Asmodeus at the entrance to Rennes-le-Château. It says Pars. Now I don't speak French, guys. So it says Parser, maybe it's Parse. Signe Tule Vencras, if that's how it's pronounced. These four letters are the anagrammic code in Latin. Salata Agni Super Enricus. Lamb's secret over Enricus. Lamb is a reference to Jesus Christ, and it is thought that this phrase over the sculpture of Asmodeus is the third of a series of encoded anagrams that speak to the location of the Holy Grail. To rabbit trail into that topic here would be lengthy and worthy of a book all of its own. So for now, consider it fodder for thought and exploration. Another possible origin for the Luciferian bloodline theory is inextricably linked to the Elohim, the pantheon of gods in mythology, who said in the book of Genesis, "Come, let us make man in our image." Elohim is the plural form of the name God. God among many gods, the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, known as the Watchers in the book of Enoch. We've already established that the word Elohim is an etymological descendant of the name Elil, chief god of the Anunnaki of the Sumerian culture. But it also has roots in the ancient Babylonian word Elu, which means shining ones. This phrase has a distinctively Luciferian connotation because the name Lucifer literally means light bearer. Additionally, if you see Lucifer as being the same person as Nakash in the Genesis account of the Garden of Eden, remember that Nakash by definition means crafty magician, illuminator, bright shining one. It is also to be noted that the descendants of Cain, who became the deified kings of Sumer, bore the title of Ari, and a term also meant shining ones. And as I've already contended, Cain, being the son of Nakash and Eve, is the first of the Nephilim mentioned in the book of Genesis. The phrase shining ones would be a very apt description for the descendants of Enoch's Watchers, the sons of God of the Genesis account, who were said to have, according to the Enochian account, hair white as snow, pale eyes, and pale skin that filled the room with light. It's Enoch 105:10. The Sumerian Ari are almost always depicted as wearing crowns, bearing horns, and some of their descendants were said actually to have had horns. For instance, the most famous statue of Moses, carved by Michelangelo, depicts him with horns atop his forehead. Not wholly inappropriate for someone who may have had a blood relation of Asmodeus. But we also must consider the anti-Semitic Semitism of medieval Europe, a time of great bigotry against the Jews and Hebrew culture. Many Christian artists in Europe, specifically under the power of the Vatican papacy, were required to depict their biblical Jewish subjects as having horns, in accordance with the opinions of the powers that be. So the presence of horns on the statue heads of patriarchal Jews from the Bible had, some say, absolutely nothing to do with the mystical. They were a political contrivance. Theologians protest that they are not horns, merely rays of light. If they are rays of light, it could also suggest a Luciferian subtext, due to the bright shining element of Nakash, the Elohim. It's obvious, even to the casual observer, that they are indeed horns, which is not at all inconsistent with the normal medieval Western depiction of Moses and other biblical patriarchs, based on the descriptions of Moses' face as cornuta, or horned, in the Latin Vulgate translation of Exodus. The Douay-Rheims Bible translates the Vulgate as, quote, "And when Moses came down from Mount Sinai, he held 2 tablets of the testimony, and he knew not that his face was horned from the conversation of the Lord with the Lord." This was, however, a mistranslation of the original Hebrew text, which uses a term equivalent to radiant, suggesting an effect like a halo. The Greek Septuagint translates the verse as, "Moses knew not that his appearance of the skin of his face was glorified." Anecdotal historical fact. Alexander the Great declared himself the son of God, and he too was rumored to have horns. In fact, to this very day, if you talk to people on the streets of Iran who have a cultural resemblance, a remembrance of his invasion, as though it happened last week, they will tell you in all solemnity that it's a historical fact that Alexander had horns, which is why he wore his long hair, to cover them up. There was an ancient Greek coin, the silver tetradrachmon, issued posthumously in the name of Alexander the Great around 242 BC, depicting Alexander with the horns of Amun-Ra. And there's a picture of that coin with what looks like the ram's horn above his ear of Alexander the Great. Cain, the first of the twin-born sons of Eve, seems to have engendered his own traditional stories, as found in an obscure Gnostic sect bearing his name called the Cainites, like the Capocratians, the salvific doctrine of the Cainites, espoused by a theology that declared the believer must gain favor with God by making the journey through everything, quote unquote. 4th century Bishop of Salamis, Saint Epiphanius, describes the Gnostic Cainites as a group of believers who possessed an obscure chaos of evil practices, consecrating lustful or illegal acts to various heavenly beings. Heretics so adulterated with the dualism, the licentious practices of Oriental heathenism, as a sort of sacred prerequisite. Interestingly, many contemporary scholars compare them to the Satanists, but that was a common thought already forming nearly 2,000 years ago. In alignment with our study of the Nephilim and the Serpentine cultures, Cainites also taught that Eve's twin sons had different fathers, purporting that Cain was the offspring of Eve by a superior power, and Abel was Eve's son by an inferior power. The Cainites were also considered an heretical group as they possessed the Gospel of Judas, in which Judas is written as the disciple who studied the mysteries of God, and that his knowledge was so much more advanced than any of the other disciples of Jesus that he, in adherence to the insistence of Jesus himself, betrayed Jesus to the Jewish Sanhedrin so that the prophecy would be fulfilled. In disparity to the accepted Gospels contained in the canonical Bible, Judas did this out of complete altruistic discipleship to his master, resulting in such a tumultuous grief that he committed suicide. And as a result of his loyalty to Jesus, his name has been besmirched in Christianity for all times. The extent to which the Merovingians knew of these alternative traditions is uncertain. Whether or not they believed in them is more uncertain still. Yet it remains likely that they both knew about these traditions and took them quite seriously. To this very day, the coat of arms of the capital of the Merovingian Empire, Stenay, bears an image of the devil, and the original name of Stenay was Satanicum. And here's that coat of arms above the gates of Stenay, or Satanicum. There you go. There he is right there. Now, I'm on page 181. We have 7 pages of this chapter left, 6.5. It's 11:44. We've been going for an hour and 45 minutes. If you're all still with me and enjoying this, we'll go on. We'll continue on. It's only 6.5 more pages, and we'll get there. So I just want to see over here if there's anything that sticks out. Big blue chickens versus reptilians, says Audrey. I have no idea what the context of that statement is, but we'll go back and take a look at it when we're done here. Wouldn't a Satanist, by definition and literal translation, mean one representing the adversary? That's exactly, Chris Jones, what that would mean. Satanist, or it would simply mean one who is a follower of the adversary. So there you go. Bug people, ant people, lizard people, bird people, fish people, fairies, elves, you name it. Tons of life out there and right here. Yeah, you're absolutely right. All right. How the Merovingians influenced Adolf Hitler is the next section. Ready for this one? All right. In 1919, at the age of 30, Adolf Hitler joined the occultist Germanic revivalist Thule Society. Although there are no historical records indicating that he ever attended a single meeting, Hitler later reconceived and organized this organization into the National Socialist German Workers' Party, better known as the Nazi Party. The Thule Society was founded a year earlier by the followers of two men, Jorg Lanz von Liebenfels, who later claimed that it was his occultist ideals that helped form Hitler's thinking, and Guido von List, a Viennese Renaissance man of many varied interests and talents, who gained his popular notoriety as an occultist and Volkisch, or ethnic folk, author. Through his writings and the popular approach to reviving Germanic mysticism, List was one of the original New Agers, establishing himself as an important contributor to what has been hailed as modern Germanic revivalism. He was a late 19th century pioneer in runic revivalism and runosophy, a specialized branch of archaic Germanic linguistics, not only used as a means to establish Germanic foundations in ancient language transmission, but also steeped in a mysticism that purported the proper usage of runes could divine, charm, prognosticate, curse, and even bring people back from the dead. That reminds me of, remember in the Aladdin cartoon? You had Robin Williams voicing the Blue Genie in that. There was a line that used to make my kids laugh. And my little girls, Abby and Bryn, when they were little, they're now 27, would always make me say this line over and over. And then my son Sam. And now my current kids have watched Aladdin for the first time in the last few weeks. And love the line. It's where the genie is giving Aladdin the things he cannot do, the caveats. Now that you have 3 wishes, here are things you can't wish for or shouldn't. And he said this line, and this made me think of it. I don't know. Every time I hear the phrase, bring somebody back from the dead, it makes me think of this. This is a rabbit trail to end all rabbit trails because I love that. Because the genie says to Aladdin, he says, and don't ask me to bring people back from the dead. And then he starts morphing into a zombie. He says, because it's not a pretty picture, and I don't like doing it. So I would say that to my kids. It would crack the hell up out of them, and they'd have me say it over and over again. It's not a pretty picture, and I don't like doing it. So there you go. List was a pagan occultist. How was that for a rabbit trail? He was a pagan occultist to the heart, and by later standards was the poster child for the colloquial term long hair. Perhaps his runic forays worked well for him, for he was highly regarded by the people who saw his particular brand of folk writing as a solid foundation to the re-emergence of Germany as a substantial power in the West. You can start to see how Hitler was getting some of his ideas. So much can be said on these matters that a veritable tome could be written on these topics alone. Suffice it for the purposes of this study to say that the Thule Society, though outwardly deemed a populist organization that lent pride to the growing nationalist movement in Germany, rather like a grown-up version of the American Boy Scouts, became the animus behind the organizing of what was known as the Deutsche, I don't speak German, so pronouncing, Arbeiterpartei, the DAP, a German workers' party that met in local beer halls and was made up of members who wanted to see a rise in the worker class. Now, this is Adolf Hitler's DAP membership card with the forged date and number that was reduced from 555 to 55 to make him appear as if he were an original founder and member. And that's that. That was his membership card for Adolf Hitler to this group. All right. Hitler, who at that time was a corporal in the German army, was ordered to attend a meeting of the DAP in order to spy on them for the purposes of establishing their political agenda. While he was at this meeting, he did what a good spy ought not do by getting into a rather violent political argument with a member of the group. In short, he was recognized for his oratory skills and later invited to become a member of the fairly unorganized party. Hitler agreed to join and began to organize the party from what was tantamount to a bunch of guys meeting at pubs to argue politics into a solid organization. Hitler renamed the organization the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the NSDAP, or the Nazi Party. According to Hitler biographer Ian Kershaw, the Thule's membership list reads like a who's who of early Nazi sympathizers and leading figures in Munich. With its small membership list including such historical German figures as Rudolf Hess, Gottfried Fieder, Alfred Rosenberg, Hans Frank, Julius Lehmann, Karl Hazar, and Dietrich Eckart. By today's standards, the Thule Society's underlying philosophy would be considered heinous in concept and socially scorned in intent. At the core of the Thule was their occultist belief in the origins of a superior man, the Aryan race. In 1917, this underlying theme of superiority extended to membership qualifications. If you wanted to join the society, you were required to sign a special blood declaration of faith, establishing your lineage. The signer hereby swears to the best of his knowledge and belief that no Jewish or colored blood flows in either his or his wife's veins, and that among their ancestors are no members of the colored races. The organizational intent of the Thule was originally an outwardly innocuous German study group headed by Berliner Walter Neuhaus, a wounded World War veteran turned art student. In 1918, Neuhaus came into contact with an occultist named Rudolf von Sebottendorf, the newly elected head of the Bavarian German Norden Wahlwärter of the Holy Grail, an offshoot organization formed after a schism with the Thule Society. Neuhaus and Sebottendorf became associates while recruiting for their particular branches, and eventually they merged their branches under the Thule name. Using it as a cover name for Sebottendorf's Munich Lodge of the German Norden Wahlwärter. Not only are we starting to see all the occultist roots to the Thule and its varying offshoots and chapters, but also the growing chimera of political power. What started in occultist folk nationalistic revitalization quickly turned populist and aggressively political in intent and heinously evil in philosophy. The Thule Society seal is seen here. That's the Thule Society seal for their organization. The occultist origins of Nazi Aryanism, specifically as influenced by the Thule's philosophical foundation, is deeply probed in Kevin Abrams. I'm sorry. I had a typo here in the book. Two S's for Abrams's, and Scott Lively's The Pink Swastika. Abrams and Lively document how the Thule Society relied on ancient occultist supernaturalism to imbue their members with powers to be used for their Aryan claims, and the foundational thinking behind their belief in the use of eugenics. The fire of Adolf Hitler's dream of an Aryan super race was fueled by the underlying occult theology of the Thule Society, adhering to the belief that they were somehow infused with esoteric powers passed on to them by the spirits of the lost civilizations of Atlantis. Members of the society regarded themselves as metaphysically imbued with godlike wisdom of these advanced ancients, fueling them to create a new race of Aryan supermen. They followed a more or less Darwinian philosophy that moved them by some esoteric eminent domain to claim superiority and eliminate the inferior races. Jorg von Liebenfels, the spiritual inspiration behind the founding of the Thule Society was a Cistercian monk who claimed to have been given revelation and enlightenment upon discovering the rune-filled tombstone of a Templar knight. After interpreting what he believed were encoded message on the tombstones, he began constructing his own philosophy of a blue-eyed, blonde-haired, God-ordained Aryan race and its superiority over lower, inferior races. Lanz was hailed the father of National Socialism by Austrian psychologist Wilfried Daum, who in 1958 penned his study of Lanz in The Man Who Gave Hitler His Ideas. This book remains a chilling history of the Merovingians and their infiltration of the Catholic Church. I think an excerpt from the book here says, like most Merovingian monasteries, Glastonbury became a Benedictine monastery, and the purpose of the Merovingian monasteries was infiltration, based on the belief that the best way to crush the church was from within. There is no doubt in my mind that the Grail legend would have been the work of the Cistercians, founded by Benedictine monks as the ratchet for the structured organization of the I'm not sure what this is in my own writing, the Priore Dei Scion. The Scion. Joseph of Arimathea is alone associated with the Grail legend and the quest of the Grail legends, which per Collier's Encyclopedia are dominated by the mystical symbolism of the Cistercians. More than any heretical Merovingian organization, the Cistercians personified the banality of evil at its finest. The name Cistercian, and of their first monastery, Cito, derive from cistus, of the Cistaceae, or the rock rose family, resembling the wild rose and cultivated in the Mediterranean. The myrrh with which Mary Magdalene anointed the body of Jesus also comes from the cistus family. And they had chosen the Magdalene, assigning her the symbol of the rose and cross in memory of the brotherhood of the Son founded by Akhenaten, who had taken as its symbol the rose and the cross. Lewis says that. Cistercians were Rosicrucians, and this Rosicrucian order of monks would triumph in its infiltration of the church. The Secret Doctrine, authored by Madame Blavatsky in 1893, became the quintessential sourcebook for 20th century metaphysical esotericism, and it was heavily influential on the construction of the Thule Society's foundational philosophies. The inner sanctum of the Thule Society was comprised of heavy-hitting occultists, some of whom were overtly Satanist, such as Dietrich Eckart, to whom Hitler very tellingly dedicated his book Mein Kampf. As a member of the Thule, despite his membership, perchance being in the name only, Hitler diligently worked to align himself to the philosophies contained in Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, the thematic undercurrent of which was that the Aryan root race theory, a Gnostic belief that humanity in its current state of evolution is destined to be refined by something called the seventh root, a belief delineating the philosophy that a race of god men, or Homo Noticus, the new man, would rise to preeminence over the rest of humanity, replacing them and cleaning the state of lesser races of color and evolutionary inferiority. It has been purported German scientists under the Third Reich in the development of their war machine and genetic research were aided by repeated contact with gray entities who came from inside what is known as the Hollow Earth. A book considered to be one of the first science fiction novels, Vril, The Power of the Coming Race, written by Lord Edward Bulwer Lytton and published in 1871 under the original title The Coming Race, despite being a fictional book with Jules Verne's style of 19th century sci-fi, was highly influential on the thinking of Hitler and the Thule Society and the Third Reich, By the way, Bulwer Lytton is the guy who came up with the lines, "It was a dark and stormy night." That was his work. Bulwer Lytton wrote Vril and had the Aryan race in it. I think very interesting stuff. Though not Lord Lytton's intention whatsoever, some later theosophists, the broader field of esotericism, founded by Madame Blavatsky, supported the notion that Lord Lytton's book was an actual fictionalized account of an existing superior subterranean master race who utilized the energy form called Vril. The Thule Society did not merely consider the book the stuff of mid-19th century science fiction, but in fact a true story based on the real magical substance. Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, endorsed this presupposition in her book, Isis Unveiled, written in 1877, and again in The Secret Doctrine, 1888. So the question that lingers is this. Although Adolf Hitler was clearly an occultist, easily influenced by the mystical and mentally governed by his innate drive to be one of the mythical royalty of the gods and demigods of ancient esoterica, was there anything beyond the simplistic interest entailing the influence of any sort of non-human involvement? And if so, was there any linkage to mythical beings that governed his actions? We all know, by the way, that Hitler was just steeped in occultism, steeped in mythology, steeped in all these figures out of mystical esotericism. And that even in the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones, the two guys from the government said Hitler was a nut on the stuff, to quote the movie. And so this is very true of Adolf Hitler. So there is some, amongst certain circles, some supposition that he was involved in actual contacts. All right? Now, let's move on with that. Let's see, where the heck did I leave off? Influence of any sort of non-human involvement. And if so, was there any linkage to mythical beings that govern his actions? As you've seen, this all funnels backward into the ancient past, linking races, religions, occult practices, and the etymological blending of language blended with the mythologies of ancient religion. And it all goes back to the Anunnaki and continued reference to them having reptilian roots of some sort. Perhaps it's time to get a soothing bath in the Great Abzu, with a fresh rinse in the Snake Marsh to collect our loose ends and organize our perceptions. Here and now, I have to admit to the fact that I loathe conspiracy theories, for they are generally the stuffs of overactive imaginations spurred into overload upon the discoveries of some obscure ancient myth or legend that they find either substantiates a theory, or at least in their own way of thinking, or gives them animus to build a new theory, generally void of historical accuracy, twisting facts and figures, dates, and interpretations of names, events, locations, and archaic religions, or occultic practices. And that, folks, ends chapter 6. We're going to go into chapter 7 next time in The New Age and the Serpent. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm leaving town on Tuesday of next week. For a week, I'll be gone, and I won't be doing any readings at all unless I find some time along the way. And I'm going to my daughter's wedding and taking the family, the wife and kids, on a little vacation on the way to stop and see my dad. We're going to stop halfway on the way back from the wedding in Ohio, where my dad lives, about 25 miles from the Serpent Mounds. So I might do a little live broadcast from there. I'll make an announcement if I'm going to do that. Now, there's very little left of this book. As a matter of fact, there's about 20 pages left of this book, 20 to 30 pages. And we're done. And I wrap it all up in there. And so the new chapter is the New Age and the Serpent. How this all ties together. And I hope that you're seeing so far in this much of the book that we've read, this whole history that you build to get to this reptilian idea, this mythos, from psychology to theology to all this history backing this stuff up to where we get to the mythos in today's times. That's why we built to this point. And it's either all that or they're just erased from the constellation of Draco. Otherwise, all of this stuff is stuff that's building a case for who I think they really are. And we'll hit that tomorrow night, Saturday night. So, folks, thank you for being here. I know it's late. We've been at this for 2 hours and 6 minutes, which makes for one of the longer readings because it was, again, a longer chapter. But I think we're going to finish the book tomorrow night. And yes, Shane, it's going to be a great time to visit the Serpent Mound. I got to study up on it a little bit just to have all my P's and Q's in place when I'm there. And if all goes well, I'll walk you around the site in a live broadcast. It'll be sometime, I'm thinking by the calendar, it's going to be Sunday of next week after the wedding, the 11th, or Monday the 12th. Sometime in that time, we're going to be at the Serpent Mounds. Probably Monday the 12th is my guess. And I'll put up some announcements if I'm going to make it to doing that. So there we are, folks. Joyce, you're welcome. I want to thank you. Muchos gracias for you being here. And Sue's, great to have you here. And oh yeah, it's already Saturday there. That's right. It's just Saturday here in the Midwest, the United States. 7 minutes Saturday. Let's see. Get your Meatball Army and Son of Patriot Reptilian gear at Etsy.com. Thank you, Audrey, for putting the link in as usual. Folks down below, hit the like button. I really appreciate that. It helps me out here. And Andrea, thank you for being here, and thank you for that. Let's see. It's a great time to visit the Serpent Mound. Don't forget to check out. Let's see. It was a very cool chapter. A lot of stuff. Hitler was fascinated with the spear that was purported to have been put in Jesus' side, says Suze. And you're right. There's all these artifacts he was looking for. There were expeditions to the Antarctica, which is still, people are wondering more and more about that stuff. Anybody see any light anomalies in here tonight? You see with my movements, do you see any flashes of light, dropping orbs or anything like that? No, you don't, because it was something unique the other night that happened here. Let's see. What can we use for a symbol with a name like that? How about a rose and a cross? There you go, Shane. So, alien human hybrids. Meh, says Andrea. So there you go, folks. There's probably a hell of a lot of information in this chat room that I didn't glean as we were going. But I'll take a look at it again. And I always do review these, see what's there. And I want to thank you for being here once again. Thanks for listening. Thanks for 2+ hours of your time tonight on a Friday night after a long week. I appreciate that. And tomorrow, I think we'll be wrapping this book up because it only goes, as I mentioned, it's shorter. It really only goes from 189 to page 205. And that's it. So you're looking at less than 20 pages. And the book is done. So tomorrow we'll wrap it up and we'll have a little more commentary on it. So be here. Be the same time tomorrow night, 10 o'clock. If you're not out partying, you can be here at 10 p.m. Central Time, 11 p.m. Eastern Time. So thanks once again, and we'll talk to you. Unless anybody's got anything you want to bang out real quick in that chat room, I think we're done. Amanda says cheers. Cheers to you, Amanda. And Let's see. Thank you, Scotty and the mods. Yes, I thank you, moderators. Who is Audrey? Thank you so much for being here. All right, guys. Talk to you tomorrow night. Once again, thank you. See you tomorrow. Bye. Good night. So long. Farewell. Auf Wiedersehen. Adieu. Where's a goodbye? Adieu. Whatever. See ya.